So, before all but a small few in this room were born, an epic chase began. A chase so epic that it would become embedded in a culture nearly 3 generations removed from its inception. A chase that borders on the absurd, a chase that could only be described as the greatest chase of all time. A chase so great, so well known, that all we need to do to be transported back is hear one sound. Meet, meet. That's right. The tales of Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote. So, for those of you unfamiliar, the basic premise of the show goes like this. We have 2 characters, Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And they engage in this incredible chase that goes on for many, many episodes, where Coyote is trying to catch Roadrunner. He uses this company called the Acme Co. in order to buy all of these quite ridiculous and absurd contraptions and traps and things in order to catch the Roadrunner, right? He goes to great lengths, buying rocket ships, buying these elaborate mousetrap-like things, but none of them work. You see, this is the insane chase that pursues. And our faith journey is a lot like an episode of the Roadrunner show where we are this third-person perspective. See, our goal is to follow the Roadrunner, follow Jesus to safety, away from Wile E. Coyote. And I get it, analogies are going to break down if they're going to be taken too literally. But stay with me on this analogy for a moment, because I believe there's something of a parallel here. Right? On our faith journey, we're going to come up either to this wall or this edge of the cliff. Right? There's going to be a moment when the canyon below is a tremendous way down. The land beneath our feet is solid at the moment. Wile E. Coyote a long ways off in the distance. A problem for yet another day. And so we stop right there, right at the edge. But you see, the Roadrunner didn't stop there. The Roadrunner came up to the edge of the cliff and just continued forward, right on to the other side. See, the Roadrunner defies gravity and soars straight across that canyon into safety. And then in a blink of an eye, somehow Wile E. Coyote is right there, and somehow he's able to continue out after him until he notices that there's the lack of the ground beneath him, right? And then, and only then, does he begin to plummet down to the bottom in the canyon below, right? You see, this logic-defying, physics-defying thing is such a common enough theme in the cartoon that the examples can be nearly endless. The laws of physics need not apply to this, mainly because it's a cartoon. But the one that lives rent-free in my head, right? The one that sits here all of the time that I can kind of ponder whenever I'm feeling is the one where Wile E. uses his amazing art skills. He puts this brick wall up and he starts painting. And he paints this elaborate mural of a road that goes winding through, and there's like a tunnel in there, and it's just this landscape. And as the person watching the cartoon, there is no perceptible difference aside from a thin layer of bricks around the edge, because it looks just like the scene continues on into it, right? But what happens? If you've seen the show, you know that when Roadrunner comes by, meep, meep, boom, books it right into the mural, disappears. We just watch him disappear as a little speck just off into nowhere. And Wile E. is shocked, just dumbfounded. So what does he do? He chases after him, runs straight into the wall, busts his teeth up everywhere, completely just obliterates himself. You see, on our faith journey, we're going to come up to these moments where we're at that cliff's edge or where we're running towards a wall. And we have a choice. We can trust Jesus in the path that he has forward, or we can let the wall stop us from a personal and deep knowing of God. To illustrate this with the Bible, I want you to journey with me to Jerusalem. If you have your Bibles, you can turn or click to the Gospel of John, chapter 5. But while you're turning there, let me paint this scene. So, Jesus is coming on to this area. There's cliff's edges, and there's a little winding spring through it. with 5 separate pools of spring water. There's these stone landings outside of them that could be thought of as like a little porch or a little like barge that you walk out on, and you can get into the waters right there. This design of this whole area was originally to wash sheep. Sheep would come down and they would get in the pools and get all nice and clean, and they'd be able to go up and do whatever they need to do, probably for shearing and or food time, right? So the sheep are going through this. This is what it was originally designed for. But now the use has changed, right? There are sick people everywhere on all of these docks, on all of these front porches with their coverings of stone. It's almost like the Black Fridays of a decade ago, right? Where people are busting down the doors, fighting over big screen TVs, except these people, they're disabled in some way or another, and they are still fighting for a chance to get into the water. They're fighting for that chance to be healed. And so now that you have that image in your head, I'd love for you to follow along or just continue to imagine as I read John's account of this moment. Starting in verse 1, he writes, "Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals. Now there is in Jerusalem near the sheep gate a pool, which in Aramaic is called Bethesda, and which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Now, the teachers among us, or those who are used to grading papers or catching typos, might have noticed there is no verse 4 up on the screen, or out of the translation I read. To make this a little more tricky, there are some of you in here whose Bibles might have a verse 4 punched right in there. So what gives? Right? Simple. Well, old school is better than new school, right? Now, besides trying to start a needless generation tiff here, right? Okay, here we go. Simply put, the oldest manuscripts that we have uncovered don't contain a verse 4. It's likely added after the fact as a means to insert a divine attribute onto what's happening to help this make sense, right? The reality is that these pools of water, they're originally there for sheep washing. But as time went on, some people started finding these healing elements in the waters. And it's most likely a combination of this natural spring with some divine element, not quite sure what that is, but more than likely it's from the faith of those going into the waters than from an angel stirring them up. That could be what happens, right? I'm not God. I wasn't there. I wasn't doing it. But what we know is from the oldest manuscripts, that wasn't present. And so it's omitted or asterisked or written, depending on your translation. But regardless of the intricacies here, this is where we start our story today. At a place meant to wash sheep that has now been overrun by people seeking healing. And among them, we're brought to focus on this one specific paralyzed man. You see, this paralyzed man is currently at that wall, not literally, but spiritually. At this point, I have alluded to this wall on our faith journey a couple times. For some, that language is going to be familiar, right? It's something that we've talked about here. And for others, I recognize that's a little bit confusing. So before we go, I want to take a moment to explain. First, our faith journeys are hardly ever linear. So to be able to say that this is a graph and everyone will follow it at every time in their life, that's no means an exact roadmap. For some, the stages are going to be slightly different orders. Some, they're going to be slightly different time periods. Some might even be happening simultaneously. But secondly, we might go through this process more than once in our lifetime. There's really no way to quantify or to track other than this is probably not something that you're going to be repeating every single day of your life. Rather, it's something that we might go through only a handful of times. And so we are going to take a look at the circle of faith. It's going to pop up here on the screen. Thank you, Mr. Nathan. You are so great. Our tech team is phenomenal, right? They're keeping track of things that are so great. Anyway, so we have this critical journey, right? This is the stages of faith. It starts with this recognition of God, saying there is a God out there, right? And then it moves into this life of discipleship where we start to surround ourselves with other believers. We start to show up to this church thing on a regular basis. And then we go into the stage 3, the productive life, where we start to change. Things start to become real. We start to take the teachings of the Bible more literally. And then stage 4, we go inward. We start taking what we hear on Sundays and what we're reading in the scriptures, and it becomes part of our lives. Stage 5 is the journey outward, where all that hard work, it starts to come out. People start to be able to notice what's happening. Ultimately, getting to stage 6, where it's this life of love, where the fruits of a living life are fully devoted and changed by God so much that others can't help but notice. There's some debate on where the wall falls. It's currently depicted after stage 4. Some might argue that it's happening at the same time as stage 4. Some say you hit the wall and then go into the journey inward. But regardless, the wall is what we're going to be focusing on today. The wall is this point in our faith journey where things become actually real. There's going to be a crisis of faith that we come up against, where we have no choice but to trust Jesus through it. And if we stop at the wall, if we stop right before that life in Jesus, we don't fully get to experience everything that has to offer. And so it's critical that we push through the wall. And I want to be real with you for a moment. There is no shame if you are standing at the wall today or if you're at stage 1, just starting to figure out who this God guy is. See, the reality is that we will all come up to a wall at some point in our faith journey. We might even come up to this wall several times in our lifetime. But church, because I care about you so much, I don't want these walls to be something that we run into like Wile E. Coyote and we bust up all of our teeth. No, I want you to run with the road runner through the wall. Honestly, for a large part of my faith journey, through Bible college and into seminary, I sat on the side of the wall just staring at it. Just staring at the wall. And church, let me be the first to tell you, you're not a failure if you're at the wall. But there is so much more for you if you journey through it. For me, I'm on this journey inward again, right? Because this isn't something linear that we're just going to we can keep accurately predicting, right? Because God is alive and active in our lives. It's just something I'm currently working on my own inability to accept grace. And see, this is where it gets tricky on this nonlinear cycle. Is this another wall? Is this something? And until I get to sit down with God and talk about it, I don't know that we'll have a full explanation on that. But you see, my wall was my battle with postpartum depression. It started with the first kid and went undiagnosed. But I sat there in the dark night of my soul. I sat in that darkness for years. It wasn't until the birth of the second kid came that I had finally realized, like, something is not okay. And when I say I realized, it was my wife who's like, dude, you're not all right. You need to go get help. And it was through that fully trusting in Jesus that I was able to come through the wall and come out on the other side. Becoming fully dependent, fully reliant upon Jesus and his healing is the only way that we can get through the wall. It's the only way I made it through the wall. But you see, I'm currently on this inward journey with grace because I struggle to give myself any. You know, when I miss the mark, I go straight to shame and straight to condemnation. I struggle a lot to forgive that driver who cuts me off in traffic. Straight to shame. Like, man, did it again. I called them names. I called them a silly head. Except it's much worse. Right? I struggle not to covet the truck and the guy next to me at the light. Just straight to shame. I get short with the kids and I'm back to shame. My list goes on and on. You see, every time this pile of shame is just heaped higher and higher. And eventually, when my wife so lovingly pulls me out, drags me out of the pit, the pile of shame becomes its own form of shame. And so now I'm into this shame cycle and the shame for the shame of the shame of the shame. And it's just become this thing that I've buried myself in. And so there I sit at the edge, my feet dangling over the cliff right there, the wall right before me. My pile of shame and guilt finally growing large enough that it's impacted my ability to offer grace to others. But you see, therein lies the problem when we sit at the edge, when we stand before the wall. I've accepted Jesus. My tithe check is cleared. I'm serving in the church, but I've not allowed the Holy Spirit to transform me into the way of Jesus. So now when my kids get too excited for the new trampolines we got, I'm setting it up and they get too excited and they want to jump while I'm trying to pull springs, I snap. And I can no longer keep extending grace because I've poured it all out and there's nothing filling back up. The change isn't happening because I haven't let Jesus bring me through the wall. Now, I share this because I want you to know I'm right there with you. We're on this journey together. I don't have it all figured out, but I hope that you would learn from my story and come with me through the wall, because on the other side, there is true healing. And here's the reality. The true way, the only way forward is through the wall. We might think in our head that we can try to build this bigger wall to jump over it so that we don't have to go through that. We might think that we can dig under the wall because, you know what, I'm really good at digging and I own an excavator. And we can get under that wall. But what we will find is that every single time, the wall is deeper, the wall is higher than we originally estimated. The only way through the wall is with God leading us. By no means do I want to over-spiritualize this road runner, but if we are truly to follow him into that portrait painted on the wall, there is a whole new life just beyond. There is true freedom and there is true healing on the other side. So how do we get to this healing? True healing starts with accepting. That accepting is in response to the question that Jesus asked that we are covering this week. John records, when Jesus saw him lying there and learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, he asked, "Do you want to get well?" "Sir," the invalid replied, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I'm trying to get in, someone goes down ahead of me." See, this invalid, he has a very interesting theology of God that I think in some ways has impacted our culture in a way that we might not directly realize, right? This first come, first serve mentality. Or perhaps more of our Western American culture is God helps those who help himself. This man is so focused on being the first in the waters, as if God's healing somehow has a limit on how many can be healed, or that God's healing is somehow limited only to those who can. In this instance, and who can get themselves into the waters at a specific time as they are moving in a specific direction, completely ignoring the omniscient and all-powerful nature of God. See, as the creator of the universe, it's as if he was limited in his ability to heal, either by the amount of sick people in the waters or by those who could touch the waters first. It's incredibly limiting God in this instance. And so as we're going to soon see, none of that thought process is true. It's not. God doesn't help those who can help themselves and get to church. God doesn't have this hierarchy of healing. You see, this account teaches us something different about God. We see a God who goes straight for the hurting people, straight to those who need him most. In the words of Charles Spurgeon, it's the place where we might expect to meet him being Jesus. For where should the physician be found if not in the place where the sick people are gathered? This encounter is not by accident. It's purposeful and intentional, but it was anything but easy. You see, Jesus' question cuts much deeper than the physical healing, because that physical healing is just the obvious part. It's what comes next that is the most difficult. It's not a stretch to say we all want to be well, right? We wouldn't sit here with a wound on our hand and say, I like that burn on my hand. I like to feel that pain. I like it that it's infected and causing me such pain. I like that my arm bends in this way, right? We wouldn't sit here and just say that. But are we willing to go through the wall to get well spiritually? We'd be absurd to not go to the doctor if those things were true. But why do we do the same with our spiritual life? So church, do you want to get well? Do you really want to? Right? It's easy to be in the cheap seats and say, yeah, obviously I want to be healed. Obviously, who wants to be in this state of brokenness or sickness? But if we're going to be honest, getting well means fully surrendering to God. It means letting go of who we once were, and that's not easy. You see, that discomfort is what some scholars call the dark night of the soul. And that's what happens when we enter into the wall. It's a place that can be the biggest hurdle for us in actually wanting to get well. You see, I find myself between a rock and a hard place trying to communicate life through the wall. Namely, because there is so much benefit. But to get to that point, there's going to be discomfort. And for some, that time of discomfort is too much. And so instead of inviting Jesus into their pain, into our pain, we push him away and we either abandon faith entirely, or we start back at the beginning of that faith cycle. This is too much. I'm not ready, so I'm just going to start back over and pretend like I can just start this whole thing again and say, God, let's start at square one, because I don't really want to be healed. For others, we've made it through the discomfort, but we can't get behind letting go. We're all right being uncomfortable. We're all right going to the doctor and letting them work on us, but we're not ready to let go of the pan that is continuing to burn us. Some of us are not ready to surrender those old ways. You see, something is always given up to get through the wall. What that is, it depends on what you've brought to the wall. Do you want to be out of debt enough to stop shopping? Do you desire a good marriage enough to stop the abusive language? Do you want sexual purity enough to stop looking at porn? Fill in the blank. It is this dichotomy that makes this passage so hard to preach about this wall. Because sometimes in life we want our circumstances to change, but we are not interested in actually changing. Jesus' question, while pointed, is completely valid. Do you want to be well? Do you? You see, this man, he'd been paralyzed for 38 years. 38 years. Nearly 4 decades of this man's entire existence has been around his inability to walk or to really move. So the obvious answer is yes, right? Because who wouldn't want to be healed of that ailment? Who would want to sit walking around with a burn on their arm for 38 years, and every time we get in the shower, we're reminded of that searing pain? But if we're honest for a moment, some of our pains, some of our brokenness have become so central to who we are, we cannot imagine life without it. Our identity has become that of our sickness, that of our brokenness. So before we can do anything else, we have to want to accept the healing. I have to want to be healed. I have to really, truly want it. Not just kind of, sort of, because that's just what our family values are, because we go to church, that's just what we do. No, I have to want Jesus to heal me. I have to want freedom from my depression in order to get well. But you see, the thing, church, the thing about sickness and about brokenness is that it has sold us a lie that we are this. That is who we are. I'm now and forever the depressed dad, right? I'm forever bound to being so disconnected from my kids, so detached, bound to feel distant from my wife for the rest of my life, because that's just what happens in that stage of life. That's the lie. I'm at this wall thinking that there is nothing else beyond it, because this is just what my life and my marriage looks like going forward. I've bought the lie. I had bought it because there is no healing. There is no amount of getting through this. But that's not true. I'm no longer the sum of my past mistakes. Paul says it clearly in 2 Corinthians. He says, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away, and the new has come. By no means am I trying to give this kind of self-help, mystical thought exercise. No, this is the question that Jesus is asking, not just to the paralyzed man, but to us. He is asking us. We can only be truly healed if we let go and we accept the healing that Jesus is offering. All right. Suppose that I want to get well. Suppose I do want to accept being healed. What's next? We accept the healing that is offered, and then we have to get up. Jesus said to him, "Get up, pick up your pallet and walk." Immediately the man became well and picked up his pallet and began to walk. Now it was a Sabbath on that day. Now, the translation that I read that from changed from the usual NIV into the NASB 2020. Why? The time-based words, immediately and now, in my opinion, were translated too soft in the NIV. Meaning, in the Greek, there is an urgency here that is not conveyed by saying, well then, and then on this day, there's, right, the Sabbath place. So this matters here because Jesus, he is wasting no time. He asked his question, heard the response, and commanded the man to get up. It's immediate. This isn't just something he's like, eventually, dude, just get on going, right? The other thing that's important here is when this occurs. The NASB renders now as both a conjunction, right? Something that's linking two things, and as a noun. It's naming something. In this case, it's a time and place. The NIV comes to the same conclusion. It's just in a more roundabout way. But you see, the directness here, I believe, matters. Because what just occurred, by Jewish law, should not have occurred on the Sabbath. We'll get to that in a second. But as I mentioned earlier, just how hard this passage is to preach. Because when we get to this point and we see the example of a miraculous healing that happened, immediately, the healing happens immediately, it can be so easy to get discouraged when that same timeline is not present in our journey. I spent the better part of 4 years going through the wall. I spent 4 years being depressed, thinking there is nothing more than just this bleak existence. But for another who's been going through that same battle for nearly 4 decades, that might seem like a drop in the bucket. I say this as both to highlight the miraculous as well as to normalize the waiting. You see, the reality is that whether the healing is immediate or whether it takes 38 years, none of this is possible without Jesus. Now, again, don't read too much into the analogy because it does break down. It is just a cartoon. But we believe that Jesus is a lot like the Roadrunner. He's gone ahead of us on a path that shows us what it's like to be in perfect union with God. He has lived the life that we could not live, and he is, no matter how elaborate the traps are, right? No matter how hard people tried, Jesus always overcame the traps. He lived the perfect life. And if we follow him, we will always be led to safety. Always. See, my Jesus, he reached down and healed me through some of the darkest days where I wanted nothing more than to numb out and to scroll on. See, my Jesus came down into the mess and he sat there with me. And when I was ready, truly ready to get well, not just, man, I don't want to be depressed anymore. No, I'm done with this. This is not who I am anymore. He picked me up and walked with me through the wall and into the abundant life. And so let me tell you, church, there's no going back. I don't ever want to go back to just knowing the head knowledge that Jesus exists. No, because Jesus, he is so much more than the facts, so much more than the knowledge. He is living and breathing an active part of my life. He is my healer, my Savior, my everything. So church, if you're here today and something is stirring in you, myself, Pastor Becky, Pastor Doug, or someone in a red host shirt would love to help you process that. Please stop us after the service, and we'd love to be there with you. And now for those who have already declared Jesus as Lord, it's so important to our journey through the wall to keep good company. Jesus continues in verse 10. He says, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. The law forbids you to carry your mat. But he replied, the man who made me well said to me, pick up your mat and walk. And so they asked him, who is this fellow who told you to pick it up and walk? The man who was healed had no idea who it was, for Jesus had slipped away into the crowd that was there. Imagine being so petty that when you're staring at a miracle in the face, instead of being able to recognize it as such, right, you're filled with hate and resentment, so much so that you're finding the one thing to pick apart so that you can find the one thing, this small cultural tradition. Gotcha. See, these religious leaders, they could not see the true healing that had taken place. Rather, they are so bogged down that they could only see a man carrying a bedroll breaking the Sabbath law. A few weeks ago, Matt preached on getting unstuck from shame. If you were here, You probably remember the pork chop incident, right? Where the pork chop falls into the toilet, and then because of shame, there is not help that is gotten. And it goes on for far, far too long. You see, I bring this up because on this journey, there are going to be some people that very well act like the Jewish leaders and try to judge our healing. Some will try to shove the shame of our past mistakes back at us. If there is no use in trying because of what you've done, you're never going to have freedom. You are always that person pre-Christ. They're going to look at us as if we have three heads when we start breaking down the wall and run full steam into it. Why would you do that? That seems painful. Just sit there, cash your tithe check, and bide your time, and you'll be good. There's nothing more for you. But you see, for others, the shame might come from our own internal dialogue. I know I fit into that camp. I cannot give myself an inkling of grace without fearing I have been permissive and just accepting of it. But you see, regardless of the world or our own voices try to tell us, it is important that we trust the way of Jesus and keep going through the wall, because there is healing on the other side. We can get up and walk, church. We can experience more of God. We just have to push through the wall and allow Jesus to take us through it. See, so the last thing that we must do is, after we've accepted Jesus' healing, gotten up, we must move on. Verse 14, after this, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Do not sin anymore, so that something worse doesn't happen to you." I want to draw your attention to what Jesus did here, right? This man who was just healed, the man throws Jesus straight under the bus. Oh, the man who healed me did it. He told me to pick up my mat. Straight under the bus when he was confronted by the religious leaders. The dude who did this told me to do it, not me. I know the law. But this is where our God stands out. You see, Jesus, he never leaves us alone. He went and he found the man who was under the pressure of the people, and he said, "I am here with you." Instead of condemning the man, saying, "Dude, why'd you throw me under the bus?" Jesus gave him a command, a next step. He says, "Go and sin no more." You see, this tells us something about the healing, that it's just the beginning. See, maintaining a walk with Jesus requires this ongoing obedience and commitment. It's not just about getting good enough and calling it a day. No. We are called to recognize Jesus as the source of lasting wholeness, urging us to rely on his guidance daily. That same invitation exists for you and me. When we are in the dark night of our souls, about to head into the wall, Jesus is right there ready to go through with us. We're not doing this alone. Jesus is right there with open arms, ready to take us through the wall. Church, this might be the hardest reflection question that we have to answer honestly. I doubt any of us would say, "No, I'm good in my pain and suffering. It's nice here," right? Surely we wouldn't. But that there is the very real reality for us that we might not be ready to accept true healing. We're not ready to get up and to turn away. But if we're completely honest with God, this question can be one of the most life-giving questions that we ask. Do you want to get well? Take a moment.